are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is March 2nd, 2025, and this is another edition of Lighthearted Light. Today's interview is a re-edited version of one that was first heard back in early 2020. First, I want to mention some news about a lighthouse that's available to be transferred to a new owner through the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. The Reedy Island Rear Range Lighthouse in Delaware is a 134-foot tall cast-iron skeletal tower lighthouse that was constructed in 1910. The GSA has just announced that it's available for transfer. It's also been announced that the Coast Guard is about to discontinue the light as an aid to navigation. The process is open to federal, state, and local agencies, nonprofit corporations, educational agencies, and community development organizations. Letters of interest are due by April 21st. Eligible entities will be given an opportunity to inspect the property. For more information, go to disposal.gsa.gov, or you can send an email to aaron.hoke@gsa.gov. That's aaron.hoke@gsa.gov. It looks like the lighthouse is in good condition, and I'm hoping it will go to some organization that will want to maintain it and to make it publicly accessible. Now on to today's interview, which was first heard in episode 43 back in January 2020. The interviewee is Fred Mikkelsen, who is one of the last Coast Guard keepers of Conimicut Lighthouse in Rhode Island. A number of lighthouses were established in the 19th century to guide shipping to Providence, Rhode Island. An unlighted granite tower was built in 1866 to warn mariners of a dangerous sandbar extending out from Conimicut Point on the west side of the Providence River's mouth, and the tower was converted into a lighthouse 2 years later. A new cast-iron caisson lighthouse was built in 1883. A fourth-order Fresnel lens exhibited a fixed white light 58 feet above mean-high water and visible for 13 nautical miles, with a red sector warning mariners of the dangerous shoal. A fog bell and striking machinery were installed in the watchroom gallery, and inside the lighthouse are 6 levels, including the watchroom and lantern. Management of the nation's lighthouses went to the Coast Guard in 1939, but civilian lighthouse service keepers remained in charge at Conimicut until the late 1950s when Coast Guard keepers took over. 18-year-old Coast Guardsman Fred Mikkelsen was assigned to Conimicut Light in 1958. One of his most memorable experiences in his 3 years at the lighthouse was a 1960 hurricane. Shortly after Fred Mikkelsen left, Conimicut became one of the last lighthouses in the nation to be converted to electricity. The light was automated, and the resident keepers were reassigned in 1963. Fred Mikkelsen still lives in Rhode Island, and he sometimes gives presentations on his lighthouse keeping days entitled Checked Main Light, Lighthouse Life in the 1950s. His family calls Conimicut Light Station Grandpa's Lighthouse. I've met Fred at events in the past, and I was very happy to have the chance to speak with him for the podcast about 5 years ago. This is an edited version of that conversation. Let's listen to it now. You were only 18 when you joined the Coast Guard and became a lighthouse keeper. What actually led you to joining the Coast Guard?
Well, after graduating from high school, a job that was supposedly guaranteed fell through. And young men in those days had a 6-year obligation to the United States of America. And so I figured I might as well get that out of the way. And the Coast Guard seemed, its humanitarian nature seemed to be the way I wanted to go.
Did you do anything else in the Coast Guard? Let me ask you, before you got an assignment at a lighthouse, was there anything else you did in the Coast Guard?
It was boot camp at Cape May, New Jersey, engineman school at Groton, Connecticut, and then transferred to the 1st Coast Guard District in Boston. But I never expected to end up 20 miles from home.
Right. You were stationed at the lighthouse in Warwick at the end of Warwick Neck before you went to Conimicut. What do you remember about the Warwick light station?
Well, I was sent there as relief lightkeeper. Harry Wilbur, a civilian light, one of the last civilian lightkeepers, was bedridden with pneumonia, and although his wife easily could have run the station, they had a lifetime of lighthouse keeping, the two of them. Started off, the day they were married, Harry walked her down to the pier, she ducked under the weather hood on the station boat, and he ran her out to Thatcher's Island. So they had a history with the lighthouse service and never had any children, and they kind of adopted me there for several weeks. And we're glad to have my company, and that's really where I learned to appreciate the history of lighthouse keeping. Up until then, they were just buildings that kind of looked different and you could see for along the shore. But between reading the lighthouse letters in the Maine Coast Fishermen and realizing the families and that there was a whole culture to lighthouse keeping, that was my introduction, and it's kind of stuck with me for all my days.
When you went to Conimicut, the officer in charge was Joe Backen. I believe he was the son of a lighthouse keeper who had been at Warwick, among other places. From your description, Joe Backen was a very interesting character. What can you tell us about him?
Well, as you say, Joe was born on Execution Rocks, down off Yonkers Way. And then the family was moved to Warwick Neck, so when I was at Warwick, I slept in the children's bedroom. I actually was sleeping in a bedroom that Joe Backen had slept in years before. Kind of a curious threads in a tapestry story. Joe was on a lightship, LV-44, prior to 1939. And then when the Coast Guard took over that part of the business, he went to Maine and served on many lights up in Maine. So he had a tremendous background. The reason that he was at Conimicut was a tragedy in his life. He lost his wife in 1956, and because he had a sister in Warwick, he got a hardship transfer to Warwick so that the family could help him look after the kids. He was 47 years old when I met him, and he looked to be 74, at least. He was weathered like any man of the sea ever is, and sharp blue eyes and short cropped hair and a grizzled chin. He was shaving was something he didn't do on a regular basis. And he kind of lived on instant coffee and Camel cigarettes, really. He was a character, by all means. He had definite ideas about things.
Yeah, I think you told me he was a good teacher.
Well, when I got to Conimicut, he was a little standoffish, and he warmed up when I told him we both had Scandinavian heritage. And when he realized that I appreciated the things he knew, especially pertaining to the equipment that I had to master as engineering officer on Conimicut Lite, he became much more friendly. And his big disappointment was that I didn't know how to play cribbage, and I wasn't interested in learning.
Did you end up playing cribbage with him?
No, I never did master the art of cribbage. We had a fellow come aboard within a few months who was an avid cribbage player, and Joe was happy.
Now, Conimicut Lighthouse had no electricity. Can you tell us how the light operated at that time?
The lamp was a 35-millimeter incandescent oil vapor lamp from the early 1900s. It was one of the last ones here in New England. Mm-hmm. It was a tank of clarified kerosene, a tank of compressed air, an air pump. The principle is that the kerosene under pressure enters a tube that over the flame that vaporizes the kerosene, sprays it into a Bunsen burner type arrangement, and the heat of that intense flame heats a mantle to incandescence, and I can't tell you the candle power, but it's a very bright light. And
you also had a fog bell there that was manually operated. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the bell, whose weight I have yet to determine, it was a big bronze bell.
Probably about 1,000 pounds, I would say. Maybe 1,000 pounds. They're usually around 1,000.
I believe it was 1,000 pounder. And different weights, the different sized bells gave different tones. It was operated by a Gamewell bell striker, number 4, which is an apparatus, kind of Rube Goldberg, if people are old enough to understand that term. Heavy cast iron weights that go down through a large tube that's in the center of the lighthouse. In the case of many of the lighthouses with bell, they had either a tall tower that housed the weights, but ours was internal, of course. The mechanism, when activated, operates a clock and a little tiny trip mechanism, and every time the bell strikes, the movement of the mechanism rewinds the clock and sets the hammer for another strike. Actually, in the lighthouse, within the structure, the sound of the mechanism was louder than the sound of the bell. We would wind it every 2 hours. Could have run longer, but of course, the longer you run it, the longer you're on the crank. We're hauling those weights back up through the tower. So I could easily learn to sleep somehow through the run, but I would wake up, and if the bell stopped for some reason, sometimes the detent would hang up for just because it was finicky and old, and the sound of the silence would wake me up, and I'd realize it wasn't striking, and get up and make whatever adjustment needed to be made.
So did it malfunction pretty often?
No, it was quite reliable. But sometimes temperature changes, drastic temperature changes, would change the clearances on the clock, the fine trip mechanism, enough to make it hang up. And pilots running the vessels, it was heavy, much heavier freight traffic in and out of Providence in those days. And pilots would not pass the light. If the light was out or the bell wasn't sounding, they'd sit out there and blow their horn and alert us to any malfunctions that we weren't aware of.
So was there a certain rule about when you activated the fog bell, when if a certain buoy or something like that disappeared from sight in the fog, or what was the rule for activating the fog bell?
Well, the fog usually comes in from the sea or out from the land, so if in any given direction the visibility got down to around 2 miles, we would start the bell. And, of course, during the hurricane, we ran the bell all the time, straight through.
Okay. Snowstorms also, would you activate it?
Yeah, anything that obscured the visibility, yeah.
How many men were assigned to the station, and how many were typically there at one time?
The station supposedly had a 4-man crew. We never had 4 men. We often had 3, sometimes had 2, and on occasion, when you have 2, one guy's there alone while the other guy is off. So I served with 15 different people on that light in the just over 3 years that I was there. 3 different officers in charge and 12 other seamen or enlisted men. A lot of people got sent there toward the end of their tour to kill the last 2, 3, 4, 5 months that they had on their enlistment, and I'm not sure whether they did it to convince them maybe to ship over or not, but I don't think it worked in very many cases.
So you had one of the longer stints there, probably of almost anybody for quite a while there. I mean, that 3 years is a pretty long time there.
Yes, the normal tour of duty was 18 months, and it was considered semi-isolated duty. So after 18 months, you could put in for a transfer to any available unit within the 1st Coast Guard District, westerly to Eastport, Maine. The district commander's personnel officer contacted me after I'd been there for 2 years and offered me a chance to leave. But the rumors of electrification were getting hotter, I guess. And the cable actually was down at Bristol on the pier, so I knew sooner or later we'd get electricity. So I requested an extension. So I was my own executioner, I guess.
So how did that happen that you were there for that one stretch for a month, or was it even a little over a month? How did that come about? And
after Joe Backen, the officer in charge was Sam E. Harris, Tex. He was from Texas. He had been in a year. We were the same age. Our birthdays were very close. But he'd been in a year earlier than he enlisted at 17. So his 4 years were up, and he signed up for another 4 years, and that gave him a month off. So he went home to Texas and left me there for that month. And and they sent the group commander's yeoman. They sent him out with me, and he only lasted one night. he couldn't stand the fact that we had an outside privy and one sink to wash our dishes and wash our faces and our feet and anything else that needed washing. So he only lasted one night. And when the relief keeper came back he had been on annual leave to Florida. Yeah. When he came back, Valinati, I made him a cake, a ring cake in the shape of a toilet seat, with, welcome relief piped onto the frosting on the top of it.
I was hoping you'd tell that story. That's what I was trying to get you to tell. I knew about that. Yeah, that's classic. So even though you had no electricity, I understand you actually had a TV. How did that work?
Well, when Joe was there, he had a 6-inch black and white TV, and we could watch not quite 2 hours of TV before the battery got so low that it wouldn't run the inverter. So, a story about that TV: it was a little tube set, of course, and it would overheat, and toward the end, it was beginning to act up pretty badly. So we figured out if we opened the window in the day room and stuck it out on the rain roof and propped it up with a couple of blocks of wood, the wind blowing over the back end of it would keep it cool enough that we could get an extra few minutes out of it before the picture fractured.
You probably only got, a couple of channels maybe on it?
Local.
Providence?
Yeah, Providence channels. I think at the time they were 10 and 12.
Channel 10, I was going to say, yeah. So, of course, many lighthouse keepers had hobbies. That was pretty common. I know you took up painting. I've seen some of your work, which is really beautiful. You're very talented. Did you paint before you went there, or is that something you took up while you were at Conimicut Lighthouse?
Well, I was always kind of interested in art and drawing. In fact, I can show you some of my grammar school report cards where it says draws and daydreams.
Those are good talents for a lighthouse keeper.
And somebody before me had done a paint-by-number craft painting, and so there were leftover oil paints, and those are what I used to paint that, or to attempt to paint that image that you've seen of hazy sun shining on the wave tops, kind of a classic
seascape.
Everybody wants to paint the seascape. So, and I read a lot. I did some watercolors. I read a lot because I didn't play cribbage.
You were at the lighthouse for a hurricane in 1960. That had to be really scary.
Well, there were 3 of us. I was on Liberty, and I got a call from Bristol to return to the station. We did do preparations. We took one of the station boats and we hoisted it up above the rain roof. So if the pier became overswept and we lost the other boat, we'd still have a escape route or something to that effect. But we did kind of made very light of it, talked about what we do if the light began to break up, because it does have a big crack that runs on the south side in the cast iron and through into the masonry from 1938, or it might have been accelerated through in 1954 hurricane. And we said, oh, well, we got some empty oil drums. We'll lash them together and make a raft and float to the Barrington shore, where we'll be taken in by a wealthy family with 3 lovely daughters. Real teenage wit,
Wow.
But it was more serious than we imagined. The landing was underwater. The waves breaking against the south side of the tower would throw water around the walk-around in such volume that the light coming through the galley window, the first-level window, would be completely blocked, and you'd be momentarily dumped into darkness. It was serious stuff. It busted the windows out of our privy. The waves that broke above the rain roof would be driven up the side of the tower and came in the third-floor windows, even though we had wooden storm windows on over the double hung. Not a lot, but enough that it had to be mopped up every hour or so. But other than that, we weathered the storm. And
you told me about something that really scary that happened in the winter once. It involved ice flows as you were heading back to the lighthouse by yourself.
Yeah, the winters of 59, 60, and 60, 61 were really bad winters for ice in the bay. It was in big chunks. There were flows, ice flows, and Barnhart came ashore to go home to. He lived in Dorchester, first-class boatswain mate, officer in charge, and I jumped in the boat and decided and threaded the maze back out to the light. But the tide had changed, and the wind had swung into the northwest fairly fresh, and it was late in the afternoon. And as I stood on the fort and steered the outboard with a long stick so I could see the openings between the flows, a big chunk came down from Gaspee, Sabins Point Way, and I knew I couldn't escape it. So I pulled up the outboard so it wouldn't be crushed, and the flow hit the other ice shelf, and actually lifted the boat high and dry onto the ice. And I kept kind of hoping that it would turn or swivel or break up, but the darkness was falling, and it didn't. I was stuck, and the temperature was dropping, and I began to wonder if anybody knew I was out there. And I actually thought about taking my laundry and kind of dousing it with gasoline and seeing if I could make a signal fire or something. And just about that time, I'm looking down the bay toward where the tug would come from Bristol, and I could see the running lights. And I knew I just had to wait for rescue. But I was awful glad to hand my bow line to the tug and climb aboard the tug for a ride back to the light. That was kind of a little scary.
Yeah, I'll bet. Wow. There was a murder-suicide at Conimicut Lighthouse. I think it was in the 1920s. Involved a keeper's wife and her son, and some people have said that the lighthouse is haunted. Did you have any unusual experiences while you were there?
None of us that were ever there when I was there had any knowledge of that. You're the one that alerted me to that. We did know that Mr. Powell, the last civilian keeper there, had died of a heart attack at the landing by the day room. That would be the second floor landing. And there were people who thought there was a chill in the air. They felt a chill in the air when they walked by that spot, and but I never put any stock in it.
One more question for you for bonus points. When you look back on your days as a lighthouse keeper, would you do it over again if you could?
Oh, definitely. It was a lesson lessons in so many things about myself, the difference between loneliness and solitude, a chance to use my imagination and to learn that I could do just about anything that I wanted to if I did a little research, and I may not have done it very well, but I could do it to my own satisfaction. It was really the time that I went from boy to man, and I appreciate that opportunity.
Beautifully said, Fred. It's truly a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you all day. It's a pleasure listening to you. You're a poet, a philosopher, an artist, and it really is a pleasure. So, Frederick Mikkelsen, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Again, it's a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you again at events in the future. Thank you so much.
And thank you for the opportunity. Yes. Have a good day, Jeremy.
Fred Mikkelsen has a great memory for his experiences as a lightkeeper, but what also makes him special is that he's always open to discussing his experiences from an emotional and philosophical standpoint. He doesn't just talk about the things that happened, but he also talks about how those things made him feel. To me, that's at least as valuable as the factual history. Also, by the way, Fred and I share the same birthday. Not the same year, but also born on the same date, not the same year, were Harrison Ford and Cheech Marin, so I think we're in pretty good company. There's some really good news about Conimicut Lighthouse. In 2004, it was transferred to the City of Warwick under the guidelines of the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. Unfortunately, nothing was done for a long time, and the lighthouse fell into very poor condition. But last year, a federal grant was secured, and restoration work was carried out by the contractor Keith Lescarbeau, who has been involved with several restorations of Rhode Island lighthouses. Conimicut Lighthouse was refurbished inside and out, and it's looking fantastic. I hope to devote an upcoming episode to the restoration. Next Sunday, we'll have a new episode of Lighthearted, focusing on Barcelona Lighthouse on Lake Erie in New York. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening, and keep a good light.